They came in the night, silently, deliberately. The killers slipped through the rural stillness of Pike County, Ohio, moving from home to home, executing 8 members of one family. No one heard them coming. There was no forced entry, no barking dogs, and no one left alive to cry out, except for the infants. 3 children, one just days old, were left alive, cradled in blood, spared by decision. This wasn't a robbery. This was something else, something far more calculated. This is the story of the Rhoden family massacre. On April 22, 2016, the quiet Appalachian community of Pike County, Ohio, woke to a horror that would shock the nation. 8 members of the Rhoden family were found murdered in 4 separate homes. The slayings were precise, execution style, carried out while most victims slept in their beds. The crime scenes were spread across multiple rural properties. Within hours, investigators knew this was no random act of violence. The killings had been methodically planned and ruthlessly executed. But why? And who? Over time, the truth would come out. A family feud, a custody battle, and a deeply twisted sense of control. The answers would eventually arrive. But first came silence, then fear, then years of slow, agonizing investigation. This is one of the most complex homicide cases in Ohio history, a true crime story of betrayal, obsession, and a small town changed forever. The victims were all members of the Rhoden family: Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, Dana Rhoden, 37, his ex-wife Hannah Mae Rhoden, 19, their daughter Frankie Rhoden, 20, their son Hannah Gilly, 20, Frankie's fiancé Christopher Rhoden Jr., 16, the youngest son Gary Rhoden, 38, cousin Kenneth Rhoden, 44, Christopher Sr.'s brother. Each was shot multiple times, most in the head. The scenes were eerily quiet. No one had time to scream. 3 young children were found alive, each left with or near their slain mothers. Hannah's days-old newborn was found in her arms. Frankie and Hannah's infant was covered in blood, but unharmed. The horror began to unravel around 7:50 a.m. on April 22nd. Bobby Jo Manley, Dana Rhoden's sister, arrived at one of the properties to feed animals. What she found inside was chilling. 2 bodies, lifeless, cold. She called 911. As other family members arrived to check on their loved ones, more bodies were discovered at multiple locations along Union Hill and Left Fork roads. By the afternoon, the toll had reached 8. The killers had moved from trailer to trailer, sparing no one they saw as a threat. But they left the children untouched. Investigators quickly noted the killings were too organized to be impulsive. Victims were murdered in their sleep or as they rose from bed. There were no signs of struggle, no smashed doors. Whoever came that night knew the layout of each home. They knew where people slept. They knew how to move quickly and quietly. Some bodies appeared to have been staged after death. Silencers had been used. Cell phone jammers may have blocked outgoing calls. Evidence also surfaced of marijuana grow operations on several properties. Theories swirled, from drug cartels to personal vendettas. But nothing stuck. There was no clear motive, no obvious suspect. Not yet. As the dust settled over Pike County, law enforcement realized they were dealing with an unprecedented crime. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation (BCI), local sheriff's departments, and federal agents formed a joint task force, the largest homicide investigation in Ohio history. The scene itself was overwhelming: 4 separate crime scenes with dozens of forensic points to process. Over 38 agents were dispatched immediately to work the sites. Hundreds of pieces of evidence were collected: bullet casings, shoe prints, DNA samples, cell phones, computers, diaries. Thousands of photos were taken, every room documented. The initial days were chaos. Helicopters hovered overhead. Reporters descended on the sleepy town of Piketon. Residents, terrified, began arming themselves. The killers had not been caught, and no one knew if they'd return. Authorities received over 500 tips and conducted more than 400 interviews in the first few weeks. Every known associate of the Rhodens was questioned. Local rumors exploded. Was it revenge? A drug feud? A botched robbery? The marijuana grow operations added fuel to the cartel theory, but agents found no concrete evidence linking the Rhodens to international crime. Then came a shift. By early 2017, investigators began quietly focusing on one family, the Wagners. George "Billy" Wagner III, his wife Angela, and their two sons, George IV and Edward "Jake" Wagner, had once been close to the Rhodens. Jake and Hannah Mae had a child together, but their relationship ended bitterly. Custody was a source of tension. Hannah had reportedly refused to sign over custody to Jake and his family. In fact, months before her death, she posted on Facebook, "They'll have to kill me first before they take my daughter." The Wagners had attended Rhoden funerals, offered condolences. But behind the scenes, investigators were watching. They noted that the Wagners had purchased ammunition, shoes matching the tread marks at the crime scenes, cell phone jammers, and firearms. The family later relocated, driving across the country to Alaska in the middle of the investigation. This only raised more red flags. With the help of federal agencies, investigators launched extensive surveillance. Cell records, GPS data, wiretaps, secret recordings. Even cloud-stored files were recovered. Deleted texts and digital evidence began painting a shocking picture. The Wagners had planned the murders for months, and then they struck, with silencers, in the dark, moving from house to house, eliminating everyone they viewed as a threat to their custody ambitions. By late 2018, the net was tightening. On November 13, 2018, law enforcement arrested the entire Wagner family: George "Billy" Wagner III, Angela Wagner, George Wagner IV, Edward "Jake" Wagner. They were each charged with 8 counts of aggravated murder, conspiracy, burglary, tampering with evidence, and more. Angela's mother, Rita Newcomb, and Billy's mother, Frederica Wagner, were charged with obstruction and perjury, though Frederica's charges were later dropped. The Wagners pleaded not guilty. But over the following years, the truth began to unravel in court. In April 2021, Jake Wagner took a plea deal. He confessed to 5 of the 8 murders, admitted to planning the massacre with his family, and spared himself the death penalty. In court, he apologized to the Rhoden family. Through tears, he said he was sorry. His testimony was devastating. He detailed how they scoped out the Rhoden homes, how they practiced, how they built custom silencers, how they carried out the murders with the children nearby. In 2022, Angela Wagner also pleaded guilty and agreed to testify. George Wagner IV stood trial in late 2022. After weeks of testimony, he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms. The final defendant, Billy Wagner, awaits trial. Years later, Pike County still carries the weight of that spring morning. 8 lives ended, 3 babies left behind. A community changed forever. The horror of the Rhoden family massacre wasn't just in the brutality, it was in the betrayal. The Wagners weren't strangers. They were family friends. They shared holidays, dinners, memories. And beneath the surface, they plotted the Rhodens' deaths for months, all to gain custody of one child. What began as a disagreement turned into a calculated act of mass murder. And it raises questions that echo long after the trials. How did no one see it coming? What warning signs were missed? Could anything have stopped it? The surviving children now grow up with questions no child should ever have to ask. About their mothers, about the night everything changed, about why they were spared. The courts may have brought justice, but justice doesn't erase memory. It doesn't erase fear. It doesn't bring back the dead. In Pike County, doors that once stayed open now lock tight. Neighbors who once waved now glance with suspicion. Because when the killer is someone you once trusted, it changes everything. And yet, amid the darkness, there's resilience. The Rhoden family, though torn apart, is not forgotten. Their names live on in community memorials, in news archives, and in the voices of those who continue to speak their story. We remember Christopher Rhoden, Sr., Dana Rhoden, Hannah Mae, Rhoden, Frankie, Rhoden, Hannah Gilly, Christopher Rhoden, Jr., Gary Rhoden, Kenneth Rhoden. May they be remembered not just for how they died, but for who they were. Thank you for listening.